Welcome back to Trusted. I'm Alan Brooks.
And I'm Brad Winkleski.
Brad, last week we ended the episode in a private data center, what you'll find all over the country, just what we call a hosting center. And we promised we were going to bring you into a real data center, a SAS 70, a SOC 2 data center. And later on this episode, we're going to be showing you what makes the difference, what operationally is different about what you've seen last week and today. Mm-hmm. But you've heard those terms, Brad. You've heard SOC 70, or SAS 70. You've heard SSA E16. You've heard SOC 2. What does that mean?
Yeah, so SAS 70 is still a term that gets thrown around a lot even today. And it's important to understand that SAS 70 was originally adopted or formed surrounding basically financial principles. And so once data centers came onto the scene, so to speak, as providers, there was some sort of standard that needed to be adopted, and that was basically the easiest one to adopt. But they over time, the industry understood that it really didn't fit very well. So June of 2011 was really kind of the turning point from when SAS 70 changed to another name, which is SSAE 16. That's the standard. However, the most popular, or I should say the adopted standards, however, for what level of compliance you meet is actually called SOC. So it's either SOC 1, SOC 2, or SOC 3. The data center we'll discuss today is SOC 2 level, but you're right, it is important to understand, though, the differences. So as Alan said, one of our intentions is to walk around and show some key pieces of this level of data center. And it's important to understand as well that we're not going to walk you through the entire facility, obviously because of security concerns and things of that nature. But our intention is really to basically compare this level of data center to the hosting center that we've seen before. So we hope this will be helpful.
All right, Brad. So listen. This is the single, one of the most important differentiators in a data center, right? So we're going to talk about security a little bit. So we're standing in the lobby, the entry point to the data center. Before we got here, we had to come into a parking lot with a secure gate. We couldn't even get into the parking lot without ringing in. We come up to the entry point of a door. The security guard has to press a button and allow us access just to get in here. Then all kinds of other stuff starts. I have to give up my government ID, my driver's license, in exchange for a badge. This badge has been vetted way before I got here, right? I have to be on an approved list. I have to be checked out. And, then there's many more steps. Tell us about what else happens after that.
Right, and so once you do come in, as you said, you do have to be on the access list, and you actually have to physically sign in after you look at the established policies and procedures for the data center itself. And then once you do get this, which has my picture on it, right, and your picture on it, that will basically let every person know behind these doors that I am exactly who I said that I was out here. Now, even when you talk about once I have this in my hand, to get into the data center, I think it's really important to understand is the intention is, and I think we've already laid it out pretty well, but that you are a known person once you get on the other side, right? But even to cross that threshold, it's really important to understand that there's basically double doors here. And so basically they call them man traps. So basically when I get in through that first door, I have to wait for that thing to completely close behind me before I can go through that second door. And the point of that is that to establish and basically to prohibit any sort of tailgating. So if in fact that's going to happen, if two people are really skinny, not like you and I, but if they're really skinny, they could maybe make that happen. But the point is that the person would see that, who's the guard out here, and it's going to be well known by all that that's happening, so they can basically lock that down. But so you can see that, besides a couple of codes and some key fobs at the other hosting center, this is a much more established process and a firm process you have to get through before you even get to the other side.
So Brad, the power of a SOC 2 data center is the redundancy and the double security and all the redundancy for everything. I mean, we showed you what we walked through. This bag got checked at another checkpoint. And I wanted to show you this as part of this segment. So this is my badge that I got in the room with, and we have access to certain areas. This is the power room. Look, it doesn't work. It won't let me in there. So it only gives me access to where I'm supposed to be.
That's right, and even as we're moving, as you're saying, from one key area of the building to another, it knows where you are and where you aren't. So even going to the data center through doors to make your way to the data center, you basically have to continue to badge in and out so that it will track you as you move through.
Very cool.
So I know we'll go take a look at actually the power distribution equipment to give you an idea of basically the level of complexity and redundancy there as well.
All right, guys, welcome back. So it's very loud in here. We're going to do our very best to explain to you some very amazing stuff. So we're standing in front of the heart of the data center, the UPS. This is how the whole data center, the servers that you're about to see, get their power supplied. And man, this place is magnificent. You know, and this is the inside of a UPS, and you'll just see tons of batteries. But that's not the important thing, Brad. I mean, tell us about this redundancy, N+1.
Yeah, so if you guys remember from last time, you know, there was that one single UPS at the bottom of the rack, but the term concurrently maintainable, and in addition, having whatever you need +1 is a huge advantage of coming to a data center facility. So for instance, this data center actually requires 3 modules worth of these, right? And so it actually has 4 because there's the need +1 additional, okay? And so then as you look at the amount of battery power or the amount of time that it can sustain the equipment, that's one thing, right? But then if in fact you wanted to maintain this rack of UPSs or basically the controller for these batteries, you have to have a whole another one being the need +1. So on the back side of this, you will have one whole additional row of batteries and one additional brain as well. And so that we talked before about how it's very difficult to have, redundancy in everything, but this is not where you want to not have redundancy. If that makes sense.
I'll tell you what else is very cool. So the last segment, you see the UPS in the bottom. And what we've just learned is they never do that in a data center. Why? Because that UPS could actually catch on fire or spill or contaminate the data center. In this situation, in this power room is where all the power's conditioned. UPS is here, ready to go.
Yeah, so if in fact you were to have any sort of explosion, any sort of drain of acid or anything like that, here it would happen in a controlled environment. Someplace else it would basically happen next to a bunch of other equipment, which might not be a good thing.
And these UPSs are set, I think the number was 22, 27 minutes. They'll hold up a system. However, in this data center, we'll talk about this in another segment, there's redundant power. There's 2 power companies coming into the building. And there's also a generator that kicks on within seconds. So this is more than adequate to handle anything that you can throw at it. All right, Brad, this is very cool. So we just left the UPS section, and we talked about there being 2 different feeds into the data center from 2 different power lines. And we talked about the UPS itself. But at some point, if something happens, it has to switch. Man, look at the switch. Look at the instrument which does that. I mean, this is industrial.
Yeah, I mean, a good illustration to draw would be if you're talking on a cell phone, right? I mean, it doesn't really care where the power's coming from, whether it's basically discharging the internal battery or whether you've got it plugged into the phone, right, and are able to talk. I mean, in the same way, the UPS doesn't really care where the power is coming from to continue to feed it. It just needs it to come from somewhere. So in that case, you basically have one big switch, one that comes from the power company, and then one that comes from generators outside. Now, we could go into a whole other segment about how many generators are there.
Yeah.
There's N+1, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, we basically have 2 completely different places where that power could come from.
I thought it was kind of cool to mention too, these are fuses. And just like in this whole data center has been redundant, the one fuse you see here on the wall is already pulled out. It's a spare switch. And you actually have to have a crane or a hoist ready to redeploy that. So man, there's just so much thought and preparation into a potential failure here.
Yeah, so you guys can see already, we haven't even gotten any further than basically security and power, but you guys can see how this is just a whole nother level as compared to basically, let's call it a hosting center or a non-audit level data center.
All right, Brad, so I tell you what, man, you can obviously see the amount of planning and design is just breathtaking. I thought this would be worth a show. This is called a halo system. And around the perimeter of the roof on the building, there are antennas. And the antennas are discharged through this mechanism into the ground in the event of a lightning strike.
Yeah, so obviously the whole intention is to basically draw that and then send it somewhere else instead of impacting things inside. You know, and a lot of data centers, I don't want to say a lot of them, all of them look at other things to keep just from violating some sort of act of God, or at least put themselves in the best position. So as you look at, like, you know, the floodplain, Tornado Alley, you know, the types of weather that could basically literally devastate operations inside, you know, data centers will do all of those kind of plans and look at all those things beforehand to not even put themselves in the position, you know, to be impacted by that.
All right, Brad, so you know, this is all cool, man. You've seen the power center, you've seen the security. End of the day, we're gonna have a server, we're gonna have a workload here, and we've gotta get to it.
Yeah.
And keeping that connectivity is so important. As you imagine, okay, we're gonna say it's all redundant. And as you can see behind us, it's an auto switching system. You know, there's 2, 3 of everything. But more importantly, there's 2 main connectivity carriers coming into this building. And tell us how they're going out, man. Tell us about that coolness.
Yeah, so basically, you know, a backhoe or something like that is the nemesis of any sort of communication architecture. I can't tell you how many times we've heard, all the dang backhoes out there and dug up my line or whatever it is. And so, you know, this particular data center, as a for instance, has basically their main connections going out 2 completely different cardinal directions, both underground. So in the case that anything happens or gets dug up on one side, it still has the completely opposite side that it'll automatically switch to in the event that happens, which is huge. You know, one of the other things we've talked about is just the amount of bandwidth available to be used. And you know, we've talked several times, you guys probably know yourself, oh, I got a 12 meg circuit at home, I got a T1, I got this customer has that. This data center in particular has the equivalent of 750,000 T1s,
Wow.
that type of bandwidth. And that is unimaginable for some folks, even myself, and even and the businesses that would basically be coming here.
Yeah, and that's one of the big points. I mean, you cannot catch up with this data center. You cannot catch up with the mass and the force buy of, you know, buying that much bandwidth and this redundancy. So.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the biggest things that I know we talked about before, but just to highlight is, you know, when people come to a data center, you know, or trying to compete with it, let's call it, you know, as you said, you can't catch up because, for instance, you know, this communication architecture and how much bandwidth they have, that is literally the cheapest thing on the planet for them.
Right.
And we can't even get involved with the right person or at the right broker level with someone to get bandwidth as cheap as or as inexpensive, I should say, as a data center.
Absolutely. All right, Brad, so we're going to talk about cooling. So in the last video, you've seen a spot cooler and you've seen we had redundant roof units. Well, listen, I've been told by our host that if you walk into a real data center and you see a spot cooler, run.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they use computer room air handling. Some of the stuff that it's just amazing. First off, here again, redundancy. Here again, you know, we're standing on a suspended floor, and all the water that these units use is piped underground. This way, in case there's a flood or a malfunction, you know, it's below the racks.
Yeah, so for the most effective use of space and the ability to scale, as you said, they put handlers in here instead of air conditioning units because the room or the space required to have all that stuff is not practical. Never mind, you know, the operational hazards it might bring up.
And I don't know what the temperature is in here. I guess I could look, but it's cool, very, very cool. So Brad, you know, who needs a data center like this? Why would you choose it? You know, obviously, when you look around, you look at the different level of stuff. The cable management's different. The standards, all these racks are identical. The cleanliness, the tidiness. Who would put their stuff in a place like
Yeah,
this?
generally speaking, you know, there's a term that has been used. It's meds, feds, and eds. So obviously, healthcare facilities, federal agencies, and educational facilities. You know, those guys really require the standards that exist in data centers this size. But also at the end of the day, if you look at a lot of clients that exist out there, and they just want something better than what they have. They have no standards, or they have really lacking standards, or quite honestly, they want to give up the need to manage all of these things, and so they would look at a data center such as this.
Well, I hope that, you know, you can see the enormity of this thing, and I hope you see the difference between a hosting center and a real SOC 2 data center.